This is Morning Express. It's time for us to look at the newsroom. And of course, right now, as we get closer to the end of the year, would like to reflect on 2015 as we wave goodbye to it. And well, let me introduce the panel this morning. To my extreme left, we have Mwenda Kilemi, who's a lecturer at the University of Nairobi in the Communications Department. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Patrick Gadara, who's a communications consultant and also a cartoonist. And I saw your cartoon this morning. Very interesting.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Paul Wafula, who is a business editor with The Standard. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen. Now, 2015, of course, we're just about to wave goodbye. And I was just looking at the dailies this morning, and it looks like we may have more people in Nairobi than usual. Apparently, it's going to be a broke Christmas. But that aside, let me start with you, Mwenda Kilemi, on maybe some of the stories that stood out for you in 2015.
Generally, for me, the big stories have been the world leaders' visits coming to Kenya. From 2 years ago, when Kenya was supposed to be a pariah state, it's been quite a switch. I think it's been very good for the president to show all this leadership. And as the new year comes along, we'll have more leaders coming to the country. So it's quite impressive the turnaround they've been able to do in terms of the vision of Kenya and how it's viewed outside in the world.
Okay. Yeah. Gadara, what stood out for you in 2015?
Well, I think there have been, for me, three major stories. First has been the ongoing issues we have with security, the Garissa attack, attacks in Mandera, etc. I also think to go to what Mwenda was saying about the leaders' visits, I think there's been like two versions of this in terms of Kenya's portrayal outside, in the sense that, yes, we've had Obama come, the Pope has been here, we've had the recent WTO conference, which all have been good. But on the other side, our government's behavior outside in forums, especially at the ASP, has tended to detract from that image. Its voting at the UN Human Rights Council, has also been a problem. And finally, I think corruption has sort of reared its head back, and we're kind of back in the pre-2013 era where we're all talking about Anglo-leasing, etc. I think that the big corruption stories are now back firmly on the agenda.
So do you think with the corruption stories, it's worrying that they've come back, or is it the media? Have we taken that up and, overplayed them?
No, I don't think you have overplayed them. I think it's truly back. And I think, if anything, the media has gone from being very much a lackey of government in the first 2 years of the Uhuru administration, as 2013-2014, to we are seeing now a change where they're actually much more willing to stand up and question the narratives coming out of government, especially on internal affairs. I think on the issues of security, there's still some reluctance to take on government to ask it tough questions about security. But on the corruption front, I think the media has been quite strong this year in pointing out the things that are going wrong.
Okay. Paul Wafula, what has stood out for you as somebody especially who sits on the desk?
Generally, I think what I must say is that this has been a very active year for journalists. I mean, we've had tons and tons of stories to work on. Corruption has really been big this year. You look right from the Langata Road Primary School all the way to now NYS. I mean, it's been an active year. We cannot say that we've struggled in terms of really what to put out there. There's enough material that's coming through. But from a business perspective, I think the country has had some very mixed reactions. We found ourselves in a very good place in that, on one end, as the two gentlemen say, we are dealing with all these issues to do with security, but on the other end, we are attracting some very significant conferences into the country. And just to mention, last week's conference on WTO is really a very significant conference that we had, that most people not really understand its impact in terms of what it's done for us here in the country and Africa.
You are basically covering that. Maybe you could enlighten us on the impact and just briefly whether we did a good job of especially letting people know what is happening and what are the gains that we have as a country or even as a continent.
I think trade is a very slow thing in terms of negotiations, and we do not expect that it will go night and ends, just people trying and come to a meeting room and decide to keep aside their country interest. So the biggest problem was people to weigh their national interest vis-a-vis the interests of the global trade. So that was the biggest challenge, but there were some very significant gains out of it. We had what we call the least developing countries who got some money to be able to continue.
Which we no longer qualify for.
We don't qualify for, but at least
because we're in base.
our neighbors,
good thing.
our neighbors will benefit from that. It's also good to look at it from the entire picture, because you see Kenya, we don't operate in isolation. The good thing is that if Rwanda, Uganda is doing well, those are our trading partners. So we should look at it the other way around and see that there will even be a bigger opportunity for us being the big brothers in the region. And then of course these issues of agriculture, where we had quite some significant commitment on subsidies. We didn't get what we really needed out of it, but at least there's some commitment in terms of trying to reduce subsidies, especially in the developing countries, so that at least we can be able to compete at the global space. And then, we are very big here on AGOA, and the US came and said, look, we don't even need all these discussions because we have given you a whole range of things you can supply to us. What's the problem? So for us here, we need to take the opportunities that are there for us to go deep into manufacturing and be able to fill that market that's already waiting for us. Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's look at terror, because we've had quite a lot of terrorist attacks, and not just in Kenya. We had the Paris attack that took place not too long ago, and possibly look at how these stories have panned out. We currently have, okay, that is not terror, it's more of genocide, but we have Burundi, and possibly some of the pictures and the coverage that has been going on. Mwenda, I don't know what your comments would be. Let's start with Kenya, on how we have covered these stories on terror, and whether we are getting there in terms of giving the real story as it is, without sensationalizing or also being insensitive to the victims.
I think the coverage has been good. The only one black spot would be the Mandela mass graves issues that came about. But apart from that, things have been great. The coverage has been good, and the response by government has been more reactive. It should be more proactive, but at least they're reacting. Before they would just completely ignore. Now they feel a sense to react to what the public is saying, what the media is saying, what they're doing. As we move forward, I would like to see more coverage on other places that would face terror attacks. We have coverage on very stereotypical areas, mainly coast and northeastern. When we talk about terror, it's the two areas we cover, but terror affects the whole country. It affects more than just the security sector, economy, everything. So that kind of coverage is not there. So I'd like to see those things. And when you talk about insecurity in those areas, I always say we are stereotyping these areas like northeastern just about terror. They have more to offer than terror. When we think of Mandera, Garissa, we just think terrorism. But these places like Wajir that are doing very well economic as well, they're really improving over the last 2 years. So some separate coverage would also be good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gadara, on how the story has been told on terror in Kenya specifically.
Well, as I said at the beginning, I think the media has been quite reluctant to question and to challenge the narratives on terror that come out of government. I think the Garissa attack was a very good example of us not learning any lessons. Pretty much a lot that happened in Garissa replicated lots of the failures that we had at Westgate. And you remember, we still don't have an official record of what happened for 4 days in Westgate.
What would you suggest we do as
well,
a media?
It's important for media to be asking what are the policies, what are the lessons. So if we were to compare the two attacks, whether it's Garissa and Westgate, or even include things like Mpeketoni, you find many similarities from the fact that we had intelligence before that wasn't acted upon, to even the reaction of the security forces. You know, the delays that we had in Garissa, the fights that you had in between KDF and the Recce Squad, which again mirrored what happened in Westgate. The Nation earlier this year had an expose where they interviewed senior policemen who said they learned nothing from the attacks. You know, and these are the sort of things that I think our media needs to really concentrate upon, because the government is putting out this narrative that security is improving because we're putting in measures. What are these measures? You know, what are the lessons? How are they handling the failures that we had before? Or are we simply waiting for the next attack and then we discover, well, actually, nothing much has been done. I think the solutions the government puts forward also need to be questioned, whether it is the 15 billion Safaricom tender to provide cameras and stuff, which has supposedly been live since May in Nairobi and Mombasa. What tangible effect has it had? Apart from us seeing the flashing
But in the news
flag.
today, they talked about the fact that they have foiled a couple of attacks.
Yes, Joseph Nkaiseri is in the Standard, I believe, where he says they've foiled quite a number. And I mean, we've seen that. We've seen quite a number that either explosive devices have been found and detonated safely, or we've even had instances where supposed terrorists were attacked before they made their attack.
Well, yes, but I mean, there will be. I'm not saying that there are no success stories, but we have got to look at this in a holistic fashion. We've got just the other day a bus being stopped, and in fact, over the last few days, we've had
there have been issues in Lamu, and
in Lamu and stuff, and we've got an operation in Boni Forest, which doesn't seem. Well, the guys who came across were reported in yesterday's Nation about these guys who came across. Shabab guys who didn't seem to be hiding or running away and stuff. So what is the effect? What effect are we having? And also, congruent to this, we've got to ask about what we're doing in Somalia and what effect that is having.
Okay. Paul, your comments on...
I think it's good to have a context in terms of what the environment that media is operating in terms of the covering even security issues. You remember we've had quite some significant issues with government in terms of regulation. We've had government coming out very, very strongly on issues of national security, journalists being arrested, and questioned because of these issues, and them even coming up with a law that wants you to show a policeman the pictures before you publish, and for good reasons and for good intentions. But in terms of how really media works, it may not be able to be practicable on the ground. But having said that, I think we cannot say that an explanation that comes through government, like we have foiled so many attacks, is good enough to cover for the one attack that has gone unfoiled, if I were to say that. So I think the explanation that government should be able to give is, look, we have failed this way, we are fixing it this way. Not saying that we can excuse this one because we have been able to stop so many others. That I don't think can really be a reasonable explanation. But just to add on to that, I think we are overplaying the Al-Shabaab card so much, and we may end up making Al-Shabaab even bigger than really it is. Because where I see it is, like for instance, the Mandera attack. For good reason, it was an attack by some armed people. But why do we say the Al-Shabaab? What is it that makes us think that it's Al-Shabaab? These gentlemen who are found in Boni Forest, maybe they were just normal thugs that wanted they were planning to attack some village somewhere. And because they were in Boni Forest, you can be able to link and think that Al-Shabaab. I mean, all these attacks may not really be Al-Shabaab. So how do we decide that this is an Al-Shabaab attack? Is it because it's in the north?
Maybe, no, I guess based on some of the things, well, for instance, we're trying to separate Christians and Muslims.
Well, no, actually, Al-Shabaab did claim responsibility for what happened in Mandera. And the guys in Boni Forest who they came across did say they were challenging KDF to come after them. They did say they were Al-Shabaab. So we don't want to be in the situation that the president was. You remember after the was it the Mandera ones where the Mpeketoni attacks, where he got into this back and forth with Shabab, whether or not it was them, But I mean, in this case, I don't think there is much doubt that the Shabab are operating in the country, and in certain areas of the country with relative impunity. They've walked into villages during the year, sat, preached for hours and stuff, and then melted out. The border seems to be as porous as it's always been. So we've got to be asking the questions. If they're building a wall, what effect has it had? How far has it gone? Any effect? And what's the thinking behind it? I think for us as media, it's important that we interrogate the thinking that government brings to attacks, and not just to take their word for it when they say that they are stopping or whatever in attacks. We want the details, and we want to know what lessons are learned, because in the end, when we get a big attack happening, and we discover that there's very same failures that had happened before still happen, it's our lives at our risk, all Kenyans. So we really need to ensure that we are asking proper questions of government and demanding answers. I think it's a big failure that 3 years, almost 2.5 years after Westgate, we still don't know what happened.
We're still not asking the question. Wanda, let me come to you, and this is drawing maybe a comparison between the Paris attack and what we've had in terms of reportage. And for instance, I remember not too long ago we had, I think it was in Mandera, where we had bodies displayed of the terrorists. And there was, of course, outcry on that in terms of why should we have such graphic details. When you look at the Paris attack, yes, on social media there was a lot of gory pictures, images. But when we look at the media houses, what they were presenting really was just the story. Is there anything we can learn from that?
It's not just us alone. Even in Burundi, the last 2 weeks have been very graphic images supplied of dead bodies, people being interrogated and all that. I don't know if you can do anything to control social media. People are going to supply those photos on social media. What can you do to control that? The government tried. They tried to put in laws that would stop people from sending photos to them among their friends, but it hasn't stopped anything. It's almost impossible.
But do we learn anything in terms of now the away from social media, but the main media houses not publishing graphic or gory details, but still telling the story and trying to be effective without necessarily showing those pictures?
But isn't that the story as well? The fact that these graphic things are happening in our country, and shouldn't that be covered?
Wafula, your thoughts on that?
I think it's depending on where someone sits. They may argue from all corners, and probably they're right. I mean, we learn a lot from the West, but that must not be the actual standard, because we have a situation whereby we only compare ourselves to the West when we want to, and when it's really when it's convenient. For instance, when we compare ourselves to Paris, for instance, when there was an attack in Paris, we had, the president of France cancelled the trips that he was going to and went to be with the people. And we saw actual action being taken after that. Investigations happening immediately. We saw CCTV camera coming up and people being identified and action being taken. For us here, after it happened, I don't remember seeing the president visiting Garissa University. I don't know if he has done that, yeah? And the Pope was touched all the way and he came all through. So when we want to compare ourselves with the developed countries, let us compare ourselves likes for likes. For instance, he has just raised that we have not asked ourselves questions, what really happened? After we even had the 9/11, US sat down and thought through themselves their systems and came up with a way of really trying to ensure that doesn't happen. For us here, we are waiting for the next attack. I cannot say that we've not done a lot of work. Our police have done quite a significant work, looking at how even they handled the WTO in terms of security. It ended without any incident, and that is something really we must congratulate them for. Yeah. But are we asking ourselves in terms of how much are we able to interrogate our systems? How are we prepared? We all wait until we realize that Trekkie Squad does not have a chopper to take them to Garissa. That's when we start wondering what has happened, which is too late in the day. So I think we need to compare ourselves. If we decide to compare ourselves with France, we should compare ourselves through the whole. Yeah. Otherwise, we shouldn't start comparing ourselves where we are not comparable.
Okay. Yeah. And talking about one of the things that may be an impediment, when we are looking at it in terms of reflecting in 2015, is journalists being harassed. We have Ngarisho, who was arrested, and of course it was vague as to with the government coming out and saying these are matters of national security. Gadara, have we overcome that hurdle in the journalism fraternity that we can report effectively without fear?
Well, I think the case you mentioned of Girashu, and even going before, you had the guys in Tana River who were beaten up by GSU guys for turning up to report. That there still is maintained an atmosphere of fear. But it's not just, I think, physical fear. We've got to think of how through the year the government has dealt with press, and they're sort of unspoken, if you will, threats to things like advertising, etc., and how even in my dealings with editors, there is a sort of a reluctance, if you will, to question or to go after especially the security areas of government, And this banner of national security, government uses it very effectively to stop oversight. We've seen them try and pass laws that limit whether the Auditor General can look at or even Parliament can oversight how the military spends its money. And this is our money that it's spending. That's supposedly for our security. We've got to be sure that they're doing the right things. The tales that came out during the year about the report on what KDF is doing in Somalia, the accusations of trading in charcoal and sugar are not new accusations. Everybody acts as if it's just the J for Justice that said it. It's come out. It's been consistent since 2012. These accusations have been there. There has been no credible investigation of them, either by KDF. KDF sits back and says, give us the evidence. They're supposed to investigate it, So we need to be asking them, the bit that Dennis Okari did, I thought was quite shallow in terms of going and actually putting the real questions and actually putting together a package that shows, that contextualizes the answers that he gets from KDF. Within the wider framework, within the wider questions that are asked. This guy is asking somebody, you've been accused of trading in charcoal, do you say yes or no? And he says no, and they say, okay, fine, that's the end of it. That is crap. But that mirrors, I think, a lot of how security is being reported. It's simply from the perspective of government, and it's simply from a government that has incentive, not to tell the truth, and has shown, by its own actions that it is not willing to be open and accountable in these issues. So for me, that's one real big black spot on the media record in 2015.
To ask a question, which security sector in the world is open?
Well,
I mean, you look at the biggest economy in the world, the U.S., and their Pentagon budget, the black budget, nobody knows how much money they spend, and they're not allowed to ask questions. Because by asking those questions, sometimes you will find out things about their security capabilities. I'm
not sure that it's black by and nobody is able to look at it. I think if you look at the record, you'll find a lot of questions being asked about how the Pentagon spends its money. One example is, I remember once they were buying nuts for, I think it was something like $80 per, because it was described as surface compression units. Which makes it sound a bit more technical than it is. Precisely. So it's not true to say that their budget is not scrutinized. It is. My problem here is our expenditures, and for us, even as Kenyans, we've got to be quite, I think, much more vigilant, because the military and security has been the place where lots of our money has been stolen. Think of all the security-related contracts that came with Anglo leasing. Think of the Kenya Navy ship. These are things that we need to be looking at and to be serious about. What they're trying to do is to say you cannot ask the questions.
I think I also want to agree with him in terms of yes, we have national security, which is very, very important to look at. And I mean, as a journalist, I will not want to put our country at risk. I mean, it serves me no interest in that. But issues to do with procurement, it's just corruption. It doesn't matter if it's in the military, if it is in any other government agency. It should just be looked for whatever it is. You can't hide under national security on a corruption issue. For instance, if we are buying a chopper, has a chopper been bought? We don't want to know the specifications about the chopper. We don't want to know how, whatever it is. We want to know if the money has actually been spent towards buying a chopper. So if the money has not been spent towards buying a chopper, we should ask the question, where is the money? I mean, you have this all clouding in terms of, if you look at the budget, I saw at some point in terms how much the military buys something like even an animal when they are going to slaughter in KDF. I mean, how much they buy a cow, for instance. You will be shocked at how much it costs. So is it because the military, they need to buy a cow at 6-7 times the normal price? or well, how is it a national security issue? So I think we need to look at it in terms of what it is, and it's taxpayers' money. You know, the military for a long time has been if I might rightly say, been pampered. I mean, most of their they have been enjoying tax-free things. I mean, you find before the issues in Somalia started. Everybody wanted to go into the military because it was basically a fattening camp. People would go there and train and earn their salaries for the rest of their life. But right now is when we are seeing actual combat. And that's why we have started seeing cases of deserters, because guys who went in there thinking they are just going to relax the rest of their life realize that you can actually be in the front line, and that is not what they hoped for. So of course you'll drop out. So for me, the issue of corruption should be looked at for whatever it is, be it in the military, be it anywhere. Because, I mean, let us say we say let us not cover the military because of national security, and then we hope that everything is fine in there, that, oh, we have the correct equipment, we have the correct, we saw the issues of us buying even explosives that do not detonate, because, I mean, we did not probably think that we'll need to use them. So for whatever reason, and something happens that we really need to use them, and then we find ourselves at risk, then that will be, I think we'll find ourselves in a more awkward situation than if we asked the questions right now to streamline the issues.
Okay. When on reporting on terror, Gadara mentioned that we've been more leaning towards reporting from the ICE government as opposed to literally asking the questions. Do you agree?
I don't. I think we're being too critical of government. Let's not forget, this is the same government that over the last 1 year has done a complete overhaul of the security sector. Name it, all of them have been replaced. Every single senior individual in government who runs a sector of the security system in our government has been replaced. That's unheard of in our history. We don't talk about that as a success. Why not? These systems we see on the road, even I have been critical about it. Do they work? Do they not work? But just because, what do we want them to show us for us to believe that all these security systems they have in place are working? What do you want them to show?
Quantifying the amount of money spent to put up the security system and the effect.
But don't you feel it? Over the last 3 years, aren't we safer now than we were when Jubilee came into power? I mean, everybody would objectively agree that things are better now than they were before.
Actually, according to an article even in the papers today, one of the reasons why people are not traveling is because they don't feel safe. They're not sure whether wherever they're going is secure. So I'm not sure whether we feel safer or not. But at the end of the day, if tax money has been used, aren't we there as the watchdog to question and say, has this money been used effectively? We're not saying the cameras don't work. Maybe they do. But for that amount of money, could we have spent it differently and secured our country in a better way?
Yes, questioning government is important. That's the only way they'll react. They'll not react if you don't question them. But at the same time, we should also be aware of what they have done. And we should give them credit for when they have succeeded. Are we optimal safety? No, we are not. But I think we are getting there. And it's important we ask questions, but we also appreciate where we are coming from and how far we have gone.
Okay, Gadara, is it possible for the media to actually take a role of also highlighting the good? Because we also seem to be very negative when it comes to reporting. We always seem to look for the holes, which is part of our job.
Yes.
But do we have a responsibility to highlight and say, here is a success story?
The media has a responsibility to tell the truth. Well, that truth is negative, positive. I find that dichotomy to be quite strange to me. You know, it's simply to tell the truth. And one actually really important role that the media plays, and you guys keep parroting it, you know, is a watchdog role. Right. There's a reason why you're the fourth estate. And your job basically is to poke holes in the narrative that the government is giving, you know. So that is not being negative.
So they should not, they should close their eyes when they've done well.
I'm not saying close your eyes or ignore, you know, but you've got to interrogate what you're told. And if it turns out to be true, fine, nice, say it.
I don't think it's even true to say.
The idea that if we say that they failed here, that we are being negative.
I did not say that.
No, I'm not saying that's what you said, but there is a lot of that out there. You know, that the media is always negative. It is its job to interrogate what it is being told. And for a lot of times, the media doesn't do that job, doesn't become serious about interrogating what the government is telling it. You know? So when they say, we are equipping police, you know, and this is how we are going to fight terror, you know, we've got something called the Ransley Report, which was produced, you know, many years ago. never been implemented. Talks about the culture within the police force itself and how it's been acting very much as it was during the colonial times, as a citizen policing unit. That it is there to protect government, not the citizenry. So when you're giving it arms, you're improving its ability to protect government, not protect the citizenry. We should ask these questions. How has that culture changed? Why hasn't the Ransley report been implemented? All the pieces of legislations that we have, how far have we gone in actually implementing them? I find, from a policy perspective, we don't ask those questions. The government, the president last year went in front of his high security folks and gave a speech on what he thought were the major challenges facing us. And number one was sovereignty, because he has a case. At the time he had a case at the ICC. Nobody questioned that statement.
I think I want to disagree with the gentleman who's saying that media doesn't say when government has done well. I think it's not also true to say that, because we write a lot. Like, for instance, the story I've just talked about, that the security, WTO ended without an incident. I wrote the story myself. It was published on Saturday. And I said this is a very good thing for the country in terms of tourism, and it was right there. But he may not have noticed it because it wasn't what would interest him, because people will naturally want to see what is negative. So if they remember about the negative and forget about the positive that we have written, it doesn't mean that
it's not because it's not there.
It's not there. If you open today's newspaper, for instance, I'm sure you can be able to just check and count how many stories are there that are good for the country, that media is writing about the successes that have happened. We have even had editions just celebrate our KDF heroes, to do, to show the sacrifice that they are doing. We have all done that, but sometimes this comes with also some negative implications. Remember the story about that we saw how the policemen were suffering at the coast, and they ended up being fired instead of government fixing it. They ended up being fired. So look at that kind of a situation whereby you don't want people to ever know that you're not doing your work. You understand? So I think it's not right to say that media doesn't do that positive stories.
I did not say you don't do positive. What the point I made was that while we do the negative, let's highlight the positive. And when we do highlight the negative, let's give some context to that negative as well. We always talk about how our police are corrupt. We don't do enough investigative reporting about the pay they get, the struggles they go through. There are stories that have come out, issues like money, but there's still not enough. We victimize, but we don't give a context as to why they do the things they do. We don't give a rational explanation why they do the things they do. It would help when you're trying to understand these issues, and the role of the media is to help us understand and get solutions if we also did in-depth stories on those issues.
Okay. All right. Okay, let's move on to something else. And of course, sports has been one of our bones of contentions, as it were, in the media. And this is not really in the media, but I don't know whether we've done a good job. We look at Harambee Stars and the fact that they couldn't even travel. But we are reporting, we're almost running after the story when there was a lot happening within, say, the football fraternity that we didn't expose in good time, such that now we only discover at the point where they cannot get a flight to go and play a match. Is there a way we can change that maybe in the time to come, so that we're not just concentrating on politics and Eurobond and corruption, such that corruption is not just in national government but even in the sports world?
I think you're right. We have not done justice to the sports fraternity in this country in terms of really making sports a national issue, as it were. And this has a lot of potential in terms of just giving back to our youth in terms of employment and changing the narrative from white-collar jobs to something else, which is really earning people quite some significant amount of money. I say that because if you even look at how we have handled volleyball girls in this country, these ladies have done all that they need to do. They have won international games, but they come back here, they're treated, sometimes they're just living, surviving, if I might say, You look at the issue of doping, and we were able we came into it very late in the day, and sometimes for good reasons. Someone will tell you that we do not want to show our sports in a negative way, and I'm sure he will be very happy for that. But once we covered that for some time, the international media picked it up, and that is why it matters, because they are competing internationally. So we may not write it here, but when the international media picked it up, now that will be fodder for them, and it will really hurt us. So if we had asked these questions here, probably some of these things will have been fixed. But on the issue of Harambee Stars, it's really sad, because, I mean, if you look at it, it's not right, and I think we can go back to the drawing board and see how best do we, going forward, be able to bring out some of these issues that are facing our sportsmen. We see what's even happening to people like Conjestina Cheng, and all those kind of things. We need really to bring them up and be able to be in a position to interrogate and help people make the right decisions going forward.
So Patrick Gadara, on the media now, at least helping making sports a national issue. We seem to always be following, you know, the what's happening.
Yes, I think we many times are constantly behind the curve when it comes to reporting what's going wrong in sports. You didn't mention the reluctance to challenge or to harm our reputation, if you will, which for me, again, becomes one of the problems when media thinks its job is to prop up Kenya's reputation, as opposed to telling the truth and to actually going out to investigate issues. The FIFA scandal was a huge scandal internationally, you know, but there was very little linkage between what was happening there and questions about what's happening here with the local FIFA affiliate, you know, KFF. You know, it took a German station, you know, to report about the 50 million that Nyamwaya is accused of stealing. You know, no Kenyan station goes after it. You know, and this is what I keep wondering is why the doping scandal, again, we were behind it. It was being reported in international news, the suspicions that Kenya has a big doping problem before, you know, it made local news. So I don't know whether it's an issue of resourcing or simply people are unwilling to go to challenge. I know Clay keeps saying that they are, I mean, there are barriers put on people get a court order stopping a certain reportage and stuff, but I don't think that's actually a sufficient reason. You know, for me, I think there is still a reluctance to go after, and if one was unkind, would say a fundamental lack of curiosity about what's going on and what's actually happening, and a willingness to actually expose it, you know, so that things can be done. So when we look at Harambee Stars, we deal with it almost as if it's an exclusion, as if it's just today it happened, tomorrow it happens, but we don't see the linkages between and the reasons why it keeps happening, you know.
Okay, Mwenda, how do we ensure that we make sports a national issue to a point where if we're reporting on corruption on national government, we have the same energy to report corruption maybe in FKF, because it really, we have so much potential and we're very quick and we're very happy to highlight our athletes. But again, if you look at the sports culture in this country, you'll find it's individuals who pop up. We really don't have a setup or an organization where we nurture this talent and we can say it's a national endeavor and, you know, effort. But how do we as media ensure that we make this a national debate and a national issue?
I think in Kenya, everything comes second to politics, including devolution, including health. I mean, everything comes second to politics. When it comes to our reporting of sports, we report on events, we don't report on an entire narrative. So we report on certain events, the issues with the playing, with the athletics scandal after it was reported internationally, as I said. With the doping story came out with that German report about 6 months ago, actually.
Right.
Yeah, right. And it only became news about 4 months. I think there is an issue with our organized sports. We seem to do well in individual sports as a country, but organized sports, they always seem to have issues, be it with sevens, rugby, to football. And I don't think there's enough critical reporting on that issue.
Do we need to develop more sports journalists who specifically just run after sports?
I think also the interest is not as much in sports as it is in other topics. I think the media houses, the media houses are responding to what people respond to, and they respond to political stories. Sports in itself gives us so much content. To the failures, to the demons that a lot of our sports stars suffer. We don't cover that enough. I mean, a lot of these big stars, they come back and 5 years from now, things are not going on so well. We don't hear those stories. But I think it's just a reflection of where the public wants, what the public wants.
Well, one thing I would say is we've got a ministry in government that is charged with this. It gets a budget. It's got a policy that it put out. How do we interrogate this?
But we don't interrogate them as much as we do other ministries.
No, I'm saying we don't interrogate them. You know, we don't go in and look at the policy and ask, how is it actually being implemented? And if it were, what would be the effects? You know, is it a logical policy? Does it actually make sense? You know, and these are the sort of things I would hope. And I don't think it's just an issue of sports journalists per se, although that would be helpful, you know. But as general, if we are fighting corruption, it doesn't matter that it's corruption in FIFA or corruption in the Ministry of Finance, you know. It doesn't matter, it's corruption, you know. And we should be able to go after it, you know. Lots of what come out about the FIFA scandal, for example, is very much interesting financial transactions that people had to sit down and shift through. Not just a guy who knows about scores and things. You get a proper financial guy to look at them, you know. And this is what I'm talking about, is we've got to put in the resources, you know, to actually follow up these stories. And fundamentally, we've got to understand our role as press as being as being tasked with ventilating those, you know, the places where we go wrong because of the country. Because the things that matter to us, the things that actually hurt us most, you know, are those places where government does things or individuals do things that we might call negative. You know, if we simply focus on, yes, we want so many medals here, and then we assume everything is fine because we did that, then we are setting ourselves up for losing much more later on.
To add to what Gadara is saying, I don't think as a country we view sports as a professional body. We say they are, but we don't treat them as a professional body. We don't question them as you would a professional body, and we don't facilitate them as you would a professional body. We always hear of issues of sports stars not getting their dues. It's not seen as something they really deserve. You're doing this for your country. Why do you need to get paid? Why are you doing this for a living? You know?
Yeah, like you mentioned, we seem to report more on events. Paul, you sit on the desk, and I think it's Gadara who mentioned, or is it Kilemi? And one of the things is that as media, we are responding to what people want to hear and see or want to know about. Is it true then that sports is not important to Kenyans to a point where we give it the back burner?
I think sports is important. Kenyans really want, it's the way we package it. That is, I think, where the problem is. Nationally, people really don't want to, if you gauge what people are talking about, you'll find Arsenal, Man U will always be top on the agenda. So we more or less ride on that, and we want to have Man U and Arsenal all the time. What is really happening to Chelsea the other day? It's really big stories. They're even trending online. You'll see that is big here. But that doesn't mean that Kenyans will don't want to know what's happening in their sports fraternity. Remember when even just that incident, as you mentioned, on the plane, I mean, Kenyans were up in arms and they were asking, how did this happen? They will be interested to know it in terms of how you package it. But I think, as Mwenda mentioned, when we are reporting just events, we miss out the actual story. Because if you look at how we report even politics, anything small that happens, any turning point is there. Any turning point is there. But sport, we wait until everything else has blown out. Then now we start wondering, how did we get ourselves here? So we have to cultivate that and try and push it gradually and make it interesting for Kenyans to look at. And then eventually we shall just be able to build that readership of sports. But you are right. I mean, we've seen most of the sports publications here in the country fold because of you do not have that kind of scale to be able to make money out of it. So technically, from a business perspective, it might be very, very, very interesting to go into it. But if you look at even the sponsorships, and this is where we need to look at it, Look at people like Safaricom. When they start saying we're not going to sponsor this kind of sports, or Kenya is pulling out from this, then we need to ask the right questions in terms of why are they doing this? Because, I mean, a corporate will want some things to be well done in terms of integrity issues, there's no corruption. When they put in their money, it's coming out clean. So when we see corporates shying away from some of these clubs, we need to ask ourselves what is really happening, because we have really, we have tried to be able to push out and say, I mean, as CSR, why are these big companies not coming into it? But we need also the sports fraternity to be able to stand up to the game and realize that scrutiny must be there, auditing of their books. And yes, I think I agree with Gadara when he says that we need to put out their financial journalists even to look at the books, to look at what is really happening, the money that is coming in and going out, and the kind of corruption that is there, and what is making people not to go into that in terms of sponsorship. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let's now look at something else that took place in 2015, and that's the Access to Information Bill, and possibly, Gadara, how we can utilize this even in times to come to ensure that we give a clear picture. One of the things that I know happened in 2015 a lot is figures. We kept throwing figures left, right, and center without necessarily defining. I mean, even look at the Eurobond right now. I'm not sure how many Kenyans you can ask, do you really understand what this 140 billion shillings that is said to be missing, what is missing, or is it there? Despite the fact that the Treasury have put something on the website. Now, coming back to the question, the Access to Information Bill, how we can utilize this to ensure that we give people the real picture?
Well, the Access to Information Bill is important. I mean, it's activating or actualizing the promise and the guarantee that's put in the Constitution that you have a right to the information that government holds, you know, that you should be able to access it. And this is essentially putting it into law, you know, and including penalties for when government refuses or people in government refuse to give out this sort of information. I think that in terms of things like the Eurobond, the Access to Information Act is it really what's standing in the way? You know, because what we lack, and I think what our media hasn't actually done, is gone out to explain. We are too busy reporting, this guy said, that guy said. That's it. We don't actually stand and interrogate what they say and say, is it actually true? So that after they've put out all the stuff on their websites and published things in the papers, and then Rotich stands up and says, well, actually, I can't tell you what projects this money went into. So you ask, okay, what were you putting in the papers then? You know, if we start actually interrogating those narratives, you know, and asking those guys, not necessarily just saying, Raila said, you know, and Rotich said, you know, and then we leave Kenyans sort of hanging who is actually telling the truth. Go out and explain it, you know, and this is what is lacking. The bill itself, I think, is important to have, as I've said before. I think we have to be very, very careful about the caveats that are going to be in that bill, you know.
Okay.
When it comes to classification, what sort of reasons can governments give not to give out information? What loopholes are there? And we need to interrogate those and make sure those make sense or are closed down. Otherwise, they're going to be constantly used. And the example, best example, is national security.
Okay.
When,
as it was used
against Girashu, you know, when he can stand up and say, well, actually, we've been caught stealing, but you shouldn't report this because the national security issue.
All right, as we wind up, I'm told we're really out of time. Mwenda Kilemi, on what you'd project and love to see the media do next year that we haven't done this year.
Oh, to just add what he said, the role of the media is to give us context and analysis. So it's good that we're getting this information, but we need the media to tell us why does it matter,
okay,
and what does it mean for you. With the Eurobond issue,
break it down.
Yeah, it's been he said, she said, he said, she said. But if the media came in and said, you know, this is what the numbers are, because the Treasury has supplied them. This is what it means for you. This is why you should care, and this is the overall story behind it. That would help.
All right, Paul, your closing comments.
I think I'll just agree with him on the issue of why people should care. The media should go right out there. We have important stories that we know are important, but we don't make them to a level where we allow the population to know why the story is important. So they keep off and they wonder why are people making noise so much about the Eurobond or whatever. But we need to move next year to be able to move out of the politics and rise above
Stick
it,
to
so
the
that
story.
stick to the story and tell people really why this is important. And it doesn't matter if you're Jubilee or CORD or whoever you are, this really will affect you in this way.
Okay. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Finally, what are you doing for Christmas? Are you going out of town?
Unfortunately, I'll be here.
You're around.
working,
So
yes,
according to the newspaper today, it looks like maybe it's a broke Christmas. What about Gadara?
Well, I love Nairobi when everybody leaves, so I'm definitely going to be here.
You're going to be around.
Yeah.
Kilemi?
If I say me in Nairobi, you might think I'm broke. So, I won't answer that question.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for closing up Newsroom this year. And that's Mwenda Kilemi, who's he's a lecturer at the University of Nairobi in communications. We also have Patrick Gadara, who is a communications expert. And last but not least, we have Paul Wafula, who is an editor with The Standard. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and have a Merry Christmas and a prosperous Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Well, this is where we're going to wind up Morning Express this morning. And for those of us on KTN News, we are going to have the News Hour coming up in just a bit. For those of us on KTN Home, have yourselves a wonderful day.